including Thanksgiving.
It is surely impossible to hold the full weight of 400 years of white supremacist colonialism and oppression of Native peoples in 10 minutes. So I want to acknowledge that something important will get left out or skipped over, and that is part of our experience today of this temptation to be perfect and let that obsession with perfection keep us from showing up. So today we show up with humility and start where we can. The text that Naomi, Steve, and Sue just read for us is an action of immediate witness from this summer's Unitarian Universalist Association General Assembly, one of just 2 statements this year. It may have a very stuffy and, dare I say, white culture format, but don't get lost among the whereases and therefores. This statement is anything but status quo. There's a link to it in the order of service email, so you can go back and look at it again and read the text rather than hearing it out loud. Members of the Indigenous Caucus of DRUM, Diverse Revolutionary Unitarian Universalist Multicultural Ministries, an organization for Unitarian Universalists of color, led the composition of this statement. It names Unitarian Universalism's relationship to the genocide of the Native people of this continent and asks us to simply address 400 years of white supremacist colonialism from the Mayflower landing to our present moment. This action of immediate witness asks us to do 6 things: to show up, to decarcerate, to decolonize, to reverse ecological devastation, to build relationships with the people of our land, to re-examine our origin stories and how we perpetuate them. Are you ready? When we think of it as a to-do list, it seems like a lot. But what if we start from the whole rather than the parts? The whole, from where I sit on the stolen lands of the Nipmuc and Pocumtuck people, looks like relationship. Remember how James Luther Adams, our big UU theologian, said all relationship should arise from mutual free consent. If you think about the whereases of the action of immediate witness, they tell a story so far from any sort of mutuality or freedom. That's what the AIW is correcting. Did you notice words like in genuine collaboration with, taking leadership from, and in solidarity? That is our mutual free consent. There's the rejection of unhealthy power dynamics that got us here in the first place. The problem we're faced with now is how to build a consensual relationship from one that didn't start that way. British colonists and then Americans violated the trust, lands, treaties, dignity, sovereignty, and bodies of the Native people of this continent. and continue to do so. The only way to repair a relationship so shattered is to return the land where it began. In the last 8 months, especially since the struggles of the Wet'suwet'en people to control their land, one phrase has echoed more and more across the Indigenous social media accounts I follow. Land back. Indian Collective is launching a Land Back platform tomorrow on Indigenous Peoples Day. Their demands: dismantle white supremacy and the institutions that perpetuate it. Defund white supremacy and the institutions that enforce it. Return Indigenous lands to Indigenous hands. Consent. Indigenous people need to be able to consent to all policies that affect them. Yeah, that sounds familiar. It sounds a lot like our action of immediate witness in a lot of ways. There's also a very concrete and specific demand to return Mount Rushmore and all the public lands of the Black Hills to Indigenous stewardship. These are the same organizers who closed the road to Mount Rushmore, stood in the way and wouldn't let the president's entourage come in before the president held his stunt there on the 4th of July. Indian Collective recognizes the influence of the movement for Black Lives in their organizing framework and have partnered with them in launching this platform, but they also recognize Black Lives Matter as siblings in the struggle for freedom. That is the way Indian Collective talks about land back. Other groups are finding different ways to pursue land back. The Native Land Trust here in Massachusetts receives land from private individuals. Wrapped up in the phrase land back is Indigenous sovereignty, relationship to the land, lament for ecological devastation. It's protecting future generations, honoring elders. It's religion and politics and identity. So take a breath. No one's actually coming for your backyard. No one is going to shoo you back to the place your ancestors left if you are not one of the original peoples of this continent. That is a way of thinking about land that's rooted in white supremacy culture, that one person would own land and exclude all others from it. If we stopped trying to own land in such a way, could we instead belong to the land as opposed to thinking of the land belonging to us? Could we be in the land's family? And then could we remember that everyone else is also in the land's family, which is to say, everyone, all living beings. Doing this in itself would be a profound step toward decolonization. So here we are, everyone, all living beings in the family of the land. That means that we're family. We are connected. And we see that. We see that in the interrelationship of species. We also see it in the mismanaged lands on fire after generations without traditional land management. We see it in the folly of hunting apex species and harming whole ecosystems. We see that when we subtract human beings from a landscape, that we also in our attempts at conservation, do something destructive. We see that we are connected. But just because we're connected doesn't mean that we're all the same, right? We don't feel the impact of white supremacy and colonialism in the same ways. I'm not just talking about the mental impact and inherited trauma of centuries of colonization. There are also hundreds of Superfund sites on tribal lands, generations of trauma, but also decades of illness for the land and its people. High cancer rates, inadequate medical care, on some reservations, a staggering lack of clean water in this time where we are supposed to wash our hands. Native women and girls face high rates of sexual violence and are one of the only groups to face more violence from other racial categories than their own. The whole system is sick. And to heal the whole, we have to go back to the whole. What can we do to be in relationship of free mutual consent with our Native siblings? We can join them in saying land back. We can reject the ways white supremacy culture would teach us to hoard resources or decide that some people don't matter. We can pressure our state to change its racist flag, which depicts Native subjugation. We can pressure our town to change its name away from commemorating an architect of Native genocide. And if that's a little daunting, so much easier than that, we can stop using the town's name as part of our congregation's name. We can build real relationships with our Native neighbors, starting with Interfaith Opportunities Network's 400 Years Project. I want to call your attention to that. That's next Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock. I hope many of you can be present online, of course, for that event. We can re-examine our relationships to our founding myths and holidays. We can sign Indian Collective's petition to return Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills. We can listen to the voices of Indigenous people speaking right now, not out of the past, of what our collective freedom might look like.